Hello and welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is James.
And my name is Matt.
And today we are looking at two amazing films. I said last week that I was very excited about talking about both of these. I'm interested to see how you found watching these, Matt. So this week we are talking about Total Recall from 1990, and we're also talking about Open Your Eyes from 1997. And what is the theme of this week, Matt?
The theme this week is escaping your identity. So we've got a couple of VR films that get us into the subject of escapism, characters that are turning to VR to get away from real life, and there's an element of self-deception in both of these films, I think, that we're going to get into. So that's what we're looking at. Yeah, like you said, Total Recall and Open Your Eyes, or Abre los ojos in the Spanish.
I'm so glad you pronounced that rather than me.
Oh, James, they say it like 12 times in the movie.
I was too busy reading the subtitles.
Fair enough. Most famously known as the film that got remade into Vanilla Sky, the famously clunky mess of a film starring Tom Cruise. And I think it's fair to say this is the superior Spanish original, right?
Oh, without a doubt.
And Total Recall, the superior original of that as well.
Yeah, exactly. So we're looking at two films which were remade really badly. So we've gone back to the source material.
Let's get started with Total Recall then.
Quaid. Cut.
Get ready for a surprise!
We can't let him run around. He knows too much. They've got your bug.
I got a lock.
There!
The bug's in your skull.
Take this thing out of the case and stick it up your nose.
They erased your identity and implanted a new one.
If I'm not me, who the hell am I?
Okay, 1990, Total Recall. Our old friend Paul Verhoeven, who directed RoboCop.
And our other old friend, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yes. What a combination. I mean, I can't think of like a more interesting duo to make a film. I mean, Paul Verhoeven, when we talked about RoboCop, we talked about his like satirical kind of directing style and how comic booky it was. And obviously Schwarzenegger is that comic book kind of hero, isn't he?
Yeah. I felt like this one eased off the gas a little bit on the satire. I had RoboCop in my head because we watched that a couple of series ago, and it's definitely one of the best Verhoeven films. I was reading an article about Starship Troopers the other day, so I kind of had that in mind before I watched the film. And yeah, I kind of felt like it was laying off the gas a little bit on the satire, but there's definitely stuff in there still that captures Verhoeven's his opinions and his attitude towards capitalism, commercialization, societal stuff like that. It definitely comes through still.
Yeah, those kind of themes and stuff creep in as you watch the film. But yeah, I definitely agree. It's not as much of a satirical piece as RoboCop was, given the sort of background we sort of talked about when we discussed that film. But I was watching an interview with Paul Verhoeven as part of like the behind the scenes of Total Recall, and he was talking about how he like never thought that he would get into sci-fi directing. That wasn't his intention. His wife sort of suggested it to him, said like, oh, why don't you do more sort of like science fiction, blockbuster kind of stuff to get into Hollywood? And yeah, he didn't really think of that initially.
Well, it's kind of understandable because I'm thinking about his sci-fi films. There's RoboCop, Starship Troopers, Total Recall. Has he got any others?
Sci-fi wise, I'm not sure. I mean, straight after that, I start thinking of like Showgirls and Basic Instincts, and those are kind of like the ones I go to. But I don't think he's done any other... Oh, Hollow Man. Hollow Man was the other one he did, which was sci-fi.
Oh, okay. Very, very different type of sci-fi, though, that one, isn't it?
Yeah.
He does... when he's doing sci-fi action, there is definitely a sense that he is satirizing sci-fi action in and of itself. Starship Troopers is the best example of that. It's a satire of fascism. Or not... I mean, you can't really satirize fascism, can you? Fascism is in and of itself a bad idea, but he satirizes how action movies kind of lean into fascism. And I kind of saw a bit of that in this. I think that Total Recall is a bit more straight down the line making an action movie, but in doing so, the theme of escapism that's running underneath that kind of adds a level of satire on the nature of an action movie, because Quaid he's disappearing into this action movie fantasy, isn't he? So creating a faithful action movie, it's then shrouded in this layer of fantasy for the character, and then he ends up living in an action movie in a way.
Yeah, and of course, like casting Arnold Schwarzenegger as your lead, I mean, I think he was involved with the film before Verhoeven, and Arnie was like, I want to get this guy on board, because initially Arnie was up for the role of RoboCop in that film, but I think we discussed about this as well, didn't we? That he was just too big to wear the suit. So yeah, so they were like, no, we can't get Arnie on board for this. But obviously there was still that sort of connection between the two of them. And I mean, this film was like, it spent a lot of time in development, and they went through loads of scripts. Like before it got to Verhoeven, it was Cronenberg. David Cronenberg had it for a bit. And he sort of like, I think he added obviously the mutant element to it, the more body horror kind of stuff. But yeah, it got to like, it was on script number 42 by the time it got to Verhoeven. And then he sort of like had to tweak it because they had so many problems with the third act, because just trying to keep it as interesting as the rest of it. So he did the twist, which we'll go into as we discuss it more in depth as we go on. But yeah, just the fact it had been in this kind of development hell, and it was all based off of a Philip K. Dick book, wasn't it? Like a short story.
Yeah, the brilliantly named Philip K. Dick novel, We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. I saw a great tweet a few months ago. Someone was saying Philip K. Dick movies all have like names like Cortical Impasse, and they're based on books called Let's See What's Happening Down at the Brain Factory. Like just taking the piss out of the kind of badass names of films that come out of quite ridiculous sounding overworked names of Philip K. Dick novels. Obviously, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? They're kind of like great little sayings, but very strange titles for novels and stories. But hey, more power to him. He knows better than we do, doesn't he?
Exactly. I mean, yeah, obviously Hollywood get their hands on these amazing stories, and they just try and think of like snappier titles. Like Total Recall, it's a snappy title, isn't it? And you instantly remember it. You recall it instantly.
But in a similar way to Blade Runner, I mean, I haven't read the book of this. I've read Androids, but I haven't read the book of this. But there is a line in this film and in Blade Runner where characters sort of awkwardly say the name of the film, and it feels very like crowbarred in. Like, what do they say in this? They're like, he might get Total Recall.
Oh, I love that. Like, I've got a friend who hates that with songs. Like, he hates a song that is titled after the chorus, which I find really weird. Yeah, he likes to listen to songs which are sort of like they've got more meaningful titles, and I'm just like, I'm gonna call it whatever the chorus is, because whatever I'm singing for the chorus is what I'm gonna call that song.
Can you give me some examples of songs that he particularly likes? Because like 90% of songs are named after the chorus.
It's because he's a rapper, so he's sort of like,
okay.
Yeah, he wants to make it all sort of deep and meaningful, as you do when you're a badass MC.
Like like the song that Bill and Ted sing at the wedding in Bill and Ted 3.
Yeah, it's got to have that like deep musicianship to it.
Yeah. Head over to Patreon if you want to hear us talking about Bill and Ted 3. That was a lot of fun. But anyway, let's get back to Total Recall. So we've got Arnie, we've got Verhoeven. It's a match made in heaven. And it comes across beautifully, doesn't it? What a great film.
It does. It's so much fun, this as well. Like, I forgot how much fun it is just in general. And it's like, it's so trippy, the story that it's telling. And like all of the practical effects, they're just so good in this.
Yeah, they must have gone through like 12 different versions of Arnie's head, like the prosthetic head, unless they just had one that was very rubbery and very malleable that they were able to just reuse in every shot where they do it. But there's a lot of shots of that, and they are nicely paired with like lots of close-ups of Arnie just like gurning away and just like really working his face. And you can tell that, I mean, Paul Verhoeven's got a great sense of humor and he uses it brilliantly in his films. and he's clearly just like having quite a lot of fun with Arnie's face and his facial expressions, but without going into like a full-on 90s Arnie comedy. It's still like the latter end of the 80s Arnie action movies, but he's having a lot of fun with what Arnie can do just with his facial expressions.
That's it. And yeah, you forget how like animated, how much he can say with just like a look. And it just like, it is comic booky, isn't it? Just like, he is this action hero. He's a massive guy. When he's properly in the zone with the acting, whatever he's doing, like you're instantly drawn to whatever his face is like. It's just very animated.
Yeah. So like I'm thinking of like the shots where he's like strapped to the chair when they first put him in for recall, and he's just like, you know, veins are just popping on his arms and his face, and he's like screaming and gurning. But then again, like, and that is, like you said, that is very comic booky, doing a single panel close up of like Superman's face when he's straining to open something or whatever. That's very comic booky. And then there was some nice counterbalancing to that. There's a scene where when he's first like unlocking the memories and he like dispatches 4 guys who are coming at him with guns. There's a lovely shot after he's killed all of them where it's framed in a kind of proscenium arch almost, or black box kind of shot with all the dead bodies around him, and he's just sort of standing there almost in silhouette. And I thought that was like a nice comic book scene as well. That was how a fight would end in a comic book, with just the stillness of after the violence.
Yeah, definitely. And it has all of those kind of things to it that really sort of bring the science fiction elements, they bring them out in this film. All of this, like the practical effects, Arnie, the way the sets look, everything just like really builds up this story. So what is the story of Total Recall then? So
Douglas Quaid is a construction worker, the biggest construction worker on Earth. He's a construction worker who looks like an action hero, and he's a little bit bored, or not necessarily bored, but really has like a thing for Mars, doesn't he? He just really wants to like escape the construction work, go on a holiday to Mars, and everyone's telling him that's a bad idea. No one wants to go to Mars with him. Because least of all, there's like a political revolution happening. Martian independence is on the crux of revolution is on the crux of happening there. And then what? And then he sees an advert, and then he's all obsessed with recall.
Yeah, because he's already dreaming about Mars, isn't he? He has like a dream at the beginning, and then you get the great bit where his eyes popping out and that kind of thing. But yeah, the fact he's a construction worker is great as well, because again, you've got Arnie, and you can't make Arnie like the original character in the book, because apparently in the book he's like an accountant or something. So he's a bit more sort of like unassuming. You can't put Arnie in that kind of role. It makes more sense for him to be a construction worker. I mean, you can put it, but then it kind of adds that more, it makes it even more comical, potentially.
Yeah, it goes into the more comedic side of it. I'm thinking of True Lies, where the whole kind of main gag of that is that he's leading the world's most boring life seemingly, but he's actually like, he's a super spy, and that's the whole gag there. But I don't know, you can do that, but like you said, it goes more into the comedy, and Arnie later did that, and it worked really well, and he's very, very good in that, playing both sides of that.
So yeah, so he's obsessed with this recall technology, this total recall technology. He keeps seeing advertisements for it. He's really intrigued by it, but all of his mates are saying, like, don't do it. There's no point. You don't want to go to Mars. You don't want to do this. You don't want to do that. Everyone seems a bit suspect, kind of like, it's all very subtle, but you've got Sharon Stone, who's playing Laurie, who's Quaid's wife. She sort of like gives him weird little looks at the beginning, and so does his construction worker pal. So everyone seems quite suspicious right from the offset. But Arnie, Quaid, he wants to go for this recall technology. And I found the whole technology really interesting. What did you think about like that as an idea? Because I think it's a really clever kind of science fiction-y thing to do.
Yeah, so it's this idea of kind of commercializing and creating a product out of memory and then selling that to people, which again is a little bit of Verhoeven's kind of philosophy. He's critical of commercialization and capitalism, and post-capitalism specifically, I think, is where he takes issue. That's the whole universe of RoboCop that he created. And it kind of comes through in this with the way that, like, so Harry, his colleague, is trying to put Quaid off going, and he says that, oh, I've got a friend who ended up getting lobotomized there. And then he makes a face that makes him look suspicious, like he's just trying to put Quaid off. But then Quaid actually asks the guy in Recall, what about this guy you lobotomized? And it's like a Simpsons scene, because the guy working for Recall is like, oh, it's much safer than that now. Like, he basically admits that, like, yeah, no, a guy did get lobotomized from this procedure, but that was a while ago and now it's fine. And he shows him an amazing graph that's, is he comparing it to, he's comparing it to going on a rocket ship to actually go to Mars. And it's like fatalities against time, and there's a line that's going up that's rocket ships and a line that's staying flat that's Recall. So the graph is saying, like, yeah, we are having some fatalities, but they are not going up at the same rate as rocket ships going to Mars.
Because they're completely different kind of things.
Yeah. It's like not that comforting, but it works on Quaid, and Quaid's sold on the idea. And particularly this concept of the ego trip, which is like the new product that Recall is selling, that allows you not only are they selling you memories of a holiday, your perfect holiday, so you don't have to go on holiday. God forbid.
It's like a virtual travel agency, isn't it? They are selling this trip, this virtual travel, which you can go on without getting on a plane, without getting on a spaceship to Mars. It just eliminates all of that side of things, doesn't it?
Yeah, but the ego trip upsell is that you're not only going to remember a perfect holiday, but you can also assume someone else's memories or a false identity that they're going to create for you that will be inserted into the holiday. So, and it kind of makes sense, if you're going to create memories and then virtually implant them, then that will contain a narrative, the narrative of your holiday. I went to the bar, I went to explore Mars, and then they're just increasing that, or not even increasing, just changing the narrative, adding in new characters, you're becoming a new character, and perhaps behaving in a different way to how you would have behaved on your holiday.
I think that's the most interesting thing, isn't it? The fact that the way he sort of like sells this package to Quaid is he says, you will be someone else. You could be, I think he shows him a list of different options, and one of them's like a playboy, a famous jock. And then he's got secret agent, obviously. And then he's sort of like saying all these things which will happen on this holiday. Sort of like you'll meet exotic women, you'll save the planet. There'll be all of this stuff which will happen, which will make it that much more spectacular. It'll be the best holiday you've ever been on.
Yeah, and initially not interested, he immediately snaps up the secret agent one, or meant to be. And that's what he goes with, and that's how we get into our secret agent action hero storyline that takes over the rest of the film.
Yeah, and that's when it becomes like a proper sort of action film that you'd imagine Arnie to be in.
Yeah, he realizes that he's been a secret agent the whole time, and he's got to get to Mars and basically save the planet and lead the revolution and all of this, and it all just falls into place like an action movie kind of for the rest of it.
But it's weird because the way they set it up is they have this moment where it looks like Arnie's awake, or they say he's having some sort of like attack or something. I can't remember the exact wording in it, but they say they haven't implanted the secret agent part into him yet. So there's that scene just before it all sort of kicks off, but it's impossible to tell if that's part of the sort of like virtual experience or whether that is actually happening beforehand. And obviously that's deliberate. But what did you think about that as a sort of like intro into this action hero sequence?
Well, it's like an awakening, isn't it? Which kind of works for VR films, the concept of waking up into a new life or a new world, whether it's waking up in the virtual world or existing in the virtual world and then waking up into the real world. We've seen the latter, waking up in the VR world. I think we've seen both already. Like those are fairly familiar concepts, but in this it's like the awakening of an identity. So it kind of works for a VR film because it fits into that mold. But here they're using it in a kind of awakening an identity within Quaid, which is going to be the character for the rest of the film. Hauser, the character that he was before Quaid was created. So it kind of flips it, doesn't it? Like he was going to go into Ego Trip and they would create a super spy character. And what we're shown or what we're told is that actually Quaid was the created virtual identity, that he's been living this little virtual reality, kind of simulated reality in. And actually he's a different guy, and that's all coming to the surface.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how we're being told what's happening. But there's always that question mark around it as to, is this all just part of this scenario? Is this part of the package in some sort of way? Like, is that his lead into, now you're a secret agent, you can really believe this story? I found that throughout the whole thing. There's always this sort of question mark as to what's actually happening. But it kind of like, you go along for the ride, you accept that he's now Hauser, and he was a secret agent, he was working for this company, and he just does all of the typical Arnie stuff. Like, he jumps in a, what they call the Johnny cabs, which are fantastic. And it's Robert Picardo, isn't it?
Is it?
Yeah, and I think it's based on him, like the look of the Johnny cab.
It certainly looks like him. I didn't realise it was his voice as well.
Yeah, I looked at that afterwards and I was like, there he is again.
You're in a Johnny cab.
I mean, what am I doing here?
I'm sorry. Would you please rephrase the question? Huh?
How did I get in this taxi?
The door opened. You got in. Hell of a day, isn't it?
So the rest of the film is kind of like, it's playing with memory, and that memory is kind of like our perception of reality. And with this, that sort of line blurs, doesn't it, as to what is real in the film and what is like a memory which has been implanted, and sort of like which of the lives which Hauser and Quaid are living is the real one.
Yeah, I think it's quite carefully set up to not really answer the question in a satisfactory way, isn't it? Like you were saying before, characters are behaving overtly suspiciously before Quaid ever goes to recall to try and dissuade him from going to Mars or going to recall those, and that fits into the narrative that he is a Martian super spy who's had his brain wiped. But then immediately after that, he goes into recall. He's describing his dream woman, and it's Rachel Ticotin, the actress who plays Melina, and we see her face on screen before we've met the character. I think it's the same woman in his dreams. But all of that, well, I mean, describing the woman and then her being created suggests that it's all a visualization that he's then going to go and experience. But the fact that he dreamt about her means she could have been a memory from his super spy days. It's all kind of hanging in the balance. And all of the stuff about, the characters acting suspiciously, if you accept that Quaid's having this schizoid embolism that they're describing, and he's in a VR memory and he's stuck in it, then all of that weird behavior is just explained by that was always part of the VR, and the VR goes back beyond what we see in the film. That's just how it plays out in his internal mental crisis. So I don't think we get a satisfactory yes or no. Yeah,
which I think is like, it's part of the joy of the film as well. You're constantly guessing as to what's happening, but also like in that sort of setup with the virtual reality, the assistants which are working on it mention a couple of things which sort of play out as the film goes on. Like, obviously they say you'll save the planet in this sort of like virtual reality dream that you're going to live. And they talk about the blue sky on Mars. They talk about that as a possibility. And they mention like alien artifacts as like, and aliens as one of the potential scenarios. So they're kind of like setting up all of these things which could potentially happen, but they don't give you a definite answer as to whether this is just all stuff which is happening in the real world anyway. So it really plays with that idea, doesn't it, as to what's real and what's not. And it kind of sets up two different possible realities, doesn't it? So either Arnie is Hauser and he's been a secret agent all this time, and everyone else has just been sort of hiding it, and he was like implanted with memories to try and forget this life that he was living. Or he is Quaid, a construction worker who wants to escape his dull reality, and then it all goes wrong. I lean to the side that Quaid is stuck in a VR memory that's gone wrong, and he's having a breakdown.
like you said, it's all the things that come to pass that's kind of been suggested through conversation earlier in the film. Just the general tone of the film as well, the way it slips further and further into almost a parody of itself. You know, it becomes the over-the-top Arnie movie that you expect and in large part want it to be.
Oh, definitely.
But the very fact that it just accelerates into that from the halfway point exponentially onwards to the end of the film, and doing all the films the characters have suggested, Saving the Planet, Leading the Resistance, blah, 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 all of that, all of this overly dramatic, excessively violent stuff that happens when you're looking at it through the lens of this could all be a make-believe fantasy gone wrong, then those parts fit together in a slightly more satisfying way than the other possibility that this is Hauser's life, this is what this guy does, this is just the kind of world he lives in.
And I remember when I watched it when I was younger and I just accepted that. I was like, oh, it's just, he's a secret agent, that's what the story's about, that's it. But then coming back to it, having this sort of like realization that there could be something more going on. But the way you talk about the violence as well and the sort of action scenes, there's one moment when he's killing his construction worker mate straight off the bat, and like he's snapping people's necks, and I forgot how violent it was. Like it's proper like Arnie action sequences, isn't it?
It's Arnie action, and also Verhoeven violence, isn't it? You know, it's nothing we haven't seen before in a Verhoeven movie, but it is. I agree with you. I was taken aback. I know the scene you mean. I felt the same way. He runs a pike or something through someone's head, and you only see it for a fraction of a second, but it took me aback. And yeah, I also thought, I mean, what did you think of the fight with Sharon Stone? Because it's almost ridiculous, but I think it kind of gets away with it. There's something quite mad about watching Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sharon Stone just wailing on each other, like fist fight, kicking and all that, trying to kill each other, like the action movie lead and a sort of romantic lead woman. But I don't know, it kind of works, and they are really going for it. It's quite convincing. It's well choreographed, and it's a good bit of violence that kind of sells it.
I thought it was great because Sharon Stone was pretty much an unknown before this film, from what I gather. Yeah,
oh, right, okay.
Because obviously she did Basic Instinct with Verhoeven after this, so I think she put a lot of so when she was cast by Paul Verhoeven and Arnie, they sort of like had a quick debate about it, and they were like, yeah, let's get her on board. And then she really took a lot of effort to get into the role. She was doing like proper like workouts and like learning to fight and all of this stuff so that she could hold her own in this film, with like obviously acting alongside Arnie in these action sequences and having to sort of do all of these fight scenes. She really put in a lot of effort, and I think it really shows as well.
Yeah, she's great. She's a great femme fatale in this. She's really convincing, and she's quite good fun, but she doesn't ham it up really. She's good as like a double agent spy,
and she's good at like she's good at switching the roles, and yeah, all of that kind of stuff really adds to it.
Talk. I said talk.
I'm not your wife.
The hell you're not.
I swear to God, I never saw you before 6 weeks ago. Our marriage is just a memory implant.
You think I'm stupid? Remember our wedding?
Was implanted by the agency.
Falling in love.
Implanted.
Our friends, my job, 8 years together. Suppose all of this was implanted too?
The job's real. The agency set it up.
Bullshit.
Sorry, Quaid. Your whole life is just a dream.
Also, I was thinking about this as well watching the film. So even before Quaid goes in for Total Recall, they're kind of setting up this sci-fi world, this world of the future, and like all of the technology they've got in around them is all sort of like, it's making it believable that something like this would exist in this reality. So the television screen on the wall, that thing, for instance, so it's like, it's a television screen, now it's suddenly outside. So it's showing you that your perception of the world can change from the offset. So it's got stuff like that. It's got the video calls. There's lots of stuff in there which kind of really cement this idea that you could be told something different and like your reality could change, and it could be like a believable prospect. Because again, this is before like The Matrix and things like that. This is 1990, where audiences haven't really come up and seen too much virtual reality stuff, I don't think. So all of these kind of ideas and science fiction tropes and technologies really sort of aid that.
Yeah, you're talking about the tropes and the concepts that are filling the world. But earlier on, you mentioned how good the set design was, and I think that you have all these like concepts and tropes surrounding the characters, but the simple magic of brilliant set design is also doing a huge amount of heavy lifting in the world building, like because those tropes and those concepts need somewhere to exist, and they exist believably in a world that looks like Total Recall, because I mean there's dozens of sets, big sets. There's very little that looks like blue screen. All the blue screen looks like when people are kind of flying through the air and stuff, and they need to sort of use blue screen for that. But for the most part, it's just very large sound stages that are very busily populated and filled out and look very realistic.
Yeah, because it was all shot in Mexico, and I know the sort of the scenes on Mars with the red sand. That's actual footage from like a red sand desert or something like that in Mexico, I believe.
Oh, nice. What was just a heavy filter tint on it?
Yeah. But all of that kind of stuff, it really makes it more believable. And like again, the practical effects, like the amazing moment when Arnie is dressed as a woman, and then the mask comes off in sections, and it's bit by bit. It just looks fantastic, doesn't it?
I thought that looked amazing. I forgot how kind of mad the whole concept is there, but it got me thinking about like the way that the practical effects are kind of showing a breakdown of identity and personhood. Like your physical identity in Total Recall is quite fragile and malleable. Your head could pop and your eyeballs could be popping out of your head. You can become a big woman. You can live inside a woman suit, and then the face just peels away and splits apart. The concept of self is malleable and worked up into something else a lot in the film, and can be edited, and I think that slots into what's going on with Quaid's psyche in the film as well.
Yeah, that sort of comes through in the mutants as well, doesn't it? With like, because like Quarto, his identity is a mystery for a lot of the film, and then they did the big reveal that he's just this creature who is like almost like a growth on somebody's body, just hidden away.
And it also works well for the spy genre, which this film is also touching on, satirizing, parodying a little bit, because no one in the film is who they appear to be. Everyone has a double identity, and as things ramp up and get more and more intense as it goes along, that concept gets ramped up when we see Kuatu, however you say it, because he's not just not who he appears to be, he's a whole other person physically on his own body, sharing the body like kind of like a Siamese twin, but they're kind of independent. I don't know what their deal is.
It's like everything in this film is ramped up so much. I mean, you've got free tits. Got to talk about the free tits. Like everything is just like, you've got so much added on, to the point where you've got a free-breasted woman as one of the things in the film.
Yeah, and again, I think it's Verhoeven's kind of slight mockery of what the expectations of an action film are. Like, he knows that he's got to have a topless scene because he's creating an action fantasy for the characters and the audience. But then to ramp it up to the nth degree, it's not just like a topless woman. It's like he's given her all the extra boob.
What do you want?
Looking for Melina.
Well, she's busy. But Mary here, she's free.
Well, not free, honey, but available.
Thanks. I'll wait for Melina.
Earth slime.
But what Verhoeven's so good at is delivering the action fantasy for anyone who just wants the action fantasy. You talked before about how you didn't pick up on these things when you were a kid. Well, the thing is, I don't think you're supposed to. I think that's what makes him such a good sci-fi director, is that he delivers such good action that is enjoyable as pure action. And this film is enjoyable as pure action. And we've both got, wonderful memories of watching it as kids, because you don't need to be thinking too much about what's going on with identity and psyche and all of that. And satirization of action film tropes. none of that matters because he's delivering brilliant action. And it's the same in RoboCop. That RoboCop is pure satire on post-capitalism, but he is also delivering perfect action. Starship Troopers, same thing. You know, he can do that perfectly. And did you say his wife put him onto doing sci-fi blockbusters?
Yeah.
Well, she was, I mean, what a genius.
Bang on the money.
Literally bang on the money, because he would have made an insane amount of money because he is so competent at action sci-fi. And I don't know, good for her to see that in your husband's talent and say, you know, you are really good at making interesting films. I think you could also make an insane amount of money if you made action blockbusters. Like, good for her. Like, she really saw that.
In the aftermath of RoboCop, it was mostly science fiction. And one of these science fiction stories was Total Recall. The basic theme of the movie is so interesting. It was, in fact, you would call it a very postmodern movie. There are two realities. Then people say, what's the real one? And I always said, there is no real one.
So let's talk about the big speech that happens midway through the film at the hotel. Now, this is when it sort of like leads into the third act of the film, doesn't it? So you've got the character of Dr. Edmar. So what did you think about this whole scene? Because it's quite pivotal to what happens afterwards.
Yeah, I think this is where you have to make a decision watching the film as to what you think the reality is. Because it's still, you know, you can still go along with it, which is essentially what Quaid does. You know, accepting or choosing to believe that he really is a super spy and Edmar has been hired to mislead him. It's not out of the question. That could also just be an Edmar suit. We know that you can wear a realistic suit of another person, you know, that's not beyond the realms for these characters. So, you know, all of that's in play. But you do have to make a choice whether or not you believe that this person has stepped into the dream world VR simulation that Quaid is trapped in to try and save him, or whether he is just part of an elaborate spy ruse to deceive him.
Yeah, because as soon as he comes on the scene, he's the guy we saw in an advert for the Total Recall technology early on in the film. And so he comes on the scene, he comes into this hotel room and basically tells Quaid, this is all a dream. It's all part of the virtual reality experience that you're going on, and none of this is real. And from that point on, he lays out exactly what will happen for the rest of the film, which is so interesting because at that point you really sort of go, okay, so did he know all of that beforehand, or is Quaid really in this virtual reality experience still?
Yes, but at the same time, he's also just describing what Quaid wants to achieve. So, you know, that would also work for that kind of a description of what's going to happen, because if he succeeds, then it's what he wanted to happen, and you know that was what he was always planning to happen. So it wouldn't be any extra like omniscient knowledge that would allow Edmar to say that. But yeah, the way it's structured, that he's kind of puncturing Quaid's world to come and deliver this message is very strong and powerful at that moment, isn't it? It's
such a pivotal moment, isn't it? And afterwards you find out that Hauser is actually the bad guy the whole time, and that adds an extra twist and an extra layer to it. And this is what Edmar's like laying out in this speech, that you will be bosom buddies with the guy who runs this company who you're trying to overthrow. So yeah, it's just, I think it would, because they had so many problems with this third act as to how to make it interesting, because you've got all of this stuff with the virtual reality at the start, and then the secret agent bits. You've got this amazing speech with Dr. Edmar, and then how do you make it so it's not just shooting and action for the whole rest of the film? How do you make it interesting, add that extra sort of layer to it, and figuring out that, okay, so the guy who you think you are is actually a bad guy, here's another twist. It's really clever.
Yeah, and it works with the psychological play that's happening inside Quaid's head as well. You've got to assume that if he is having a schizoid embolism, which I do wonder if that's a real thing or not. Both of those are two words that are definitely words, but I don't know if when you put them together it means anything. But if he's having this schizoid embolism and he's kind of constructing in real time a virtual narrative because of what they've done to him in Recall, you've got to assume that there would be a bit of self-hatred and antagonism with himself because he leads such a boring and disappointing life. So his original life he would feel a bit hostile towards, maybe, I would have thought, which then works nicely for the narrative that plays out in VR, which is that he literally becomes the antagonist of his own story, and his original self is this villain. It's not just someone he's disappointed with, it's actually played up into a much more villainous kind of character.
Yeah, and that adds so much more to it, doesn't it? Because it's all about his perception of his own identity, and like he perceives that his original identity is dull and boring, and he's so against it that when he's given the option of being this super secret agent, that he'd rather believe that, wouldn't he? He'd rather live that life. And then he's kind of rewriting his reality in this almost. If you go down the route of this is all a virtual reality dream, he's sort of like, he's trying to make it more believable for himself and add in more twists and make it more exciting. And yeah, and it just becomes that action film you want to see. So it's constantly ramping up, isn't it? So you've had this twist that Quaid is actually the bad guy, but no, I'm not going to be the bad guy anymore. I'm going to be the hero, the savior of Mars. And he does save the planet, doesn't he? He finds out about this alien technology that could potentially give Mars an atmosphere. He shoots a bunch of guys. He's using all of the secret weapons. There's a bit when he pulls out a drill, and because he's a construction worker, he knows how to attack a bulldozer in the right place with this massive drill, which is absolutely amazing. So he's got all of these big action sequences, and it all sort of ramps up to this finale where he saved the planet, doesn't it?
Yeah, he's the superhero.
Yeah, he's the superhero, but there is still that question mark over the ending and the final moment. So you've got like, all ramps up, he saved the world, and he like has this sort of like big romantic kiss with Melina at the end, but then it fades out, but it doesn't fade to black. There's like a white fade. And this is something Paul Verhoeven has said. He deliberately did that because if he'd done a fade to black, he felt that would be more sort of like, okay, it was all real, that's the end of the film. But by purposefully doing a fade to white, he said it for him, it left that question mark as to which reality was the real one the whole time.
Yeah, it sort of works in the I understand what he's getting at, the filmic language of a fade to black. Fade to black equals closure, resolution, closing the book. That it's the filmic version of closing the back cover of a book when you're done with it, and that's the end. So yeah, I can kind of see that.
Like, I think fade to white is kind of like if he's died and he's sort of seeing the light almost. That's kind of how I interpreted it, because if he is lobotomized by the end, then that's it.
Yeah. I like that the dialogue it's just that one line where he's like, what if this is all a dream? But they just sort of like wash over it. Like she's like, well then kiss me quick.
There are so many good lines in this. I mean, we didn't even talk about when we talked about the Sharon Stone bit, when he says, consider this a divorce.
Amazing.
There's so many sharp lines and witty bits of dialogue in this, which are great.
Yeah, you got a lot of nerve showing your face around here, Hauser. Look who's talking. Yeah, and it works because he's stepping into the fantasy role of the interplanetary super spy. So of course he would talk like Arnie and have quips and have be like Arnie in Commando or Predator.
Exactly, and he's escaping his real life into this sort of like dream world, this potential fantasy, and that's basically what happens in the next film that we're looking at as well, doesn't it? So let's talk a little bit about Open Your Eyes from 1997.
La verdad, puede que no la soportaras.
Open Your Eyes, Abre los Ojos from 1997.
Can you say that one more time, Matt? I just want to hear you say it.
Abre los Ojos.
Fantastic.
I don't know if that's any good. Directed by Alejandro Amenabar. I think that's how you say that. This is like, I mean, how would you describe this? It's like a kitchen sink drama turns into a Hitchcock Vertigo kind of thriller plus sci-fi VR.
I mean, I think you pretty much just used all the best descriptions for that. Yes, I would say exactly that, Matt. I would say exactly what you just said. But yeah, it's kind of like a fever dream, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's also a very good description as well. It definitely like gets into that fever dream. Dream is key, isn't it? Because it links the concept of VR to the nature of dreams. That's something that we've seen a little bit, and we're definitely going to see more of, the dream world constructed through virtual reality technology. This film really leans into that and presents a dream on screen that turns out to be VR, and I think it would be useful to say that up front.
Yeah,
right?
it's like, it's definitely a core part of the film, but you could watch this and sort of not know what's going on. I mean, for a lot of it, when I was watching it, I'd forgotten that, like, how it ended. So it was a real interesting experience going back to this. But so the initial setup, though, let's talk about that. So handsome 25-year-old Caesar has a successful career. He's got lots of expensive cars, swanky sort of apartment. He's very much loved by the ladies, and everything seems to be going right for him at the start, doesn't it? But even when you're first introduced to it, it's kind of like this dream narrative is sort of set up. Like, he wakes from a dream at the start, and then he's driving around, there's nobody there, and all of this sort of like weird stuff is cut in between this sort of like this life that he's living.
Yeah, and those are actual dreams, aren't they? Because he's also narrating the story to someone off screen. We're going to see it's like a psychiatrist, and he's arrested for a crime, for murder. We learn later, but it's all, you have to wait for it to be unraveled, and it's not entirely clear. You've got different time frames, the past and the present, or the present and the future, and there are actual dreams, definite dreams. The film's going to turn into dream logic later, but he's describing dreams to his psychiatrist, so we're seeing them on film. Like you said, the empty city at the start of the film, I think, is just literally a dream that Cesar has. But that's all setting up the tone of the film, isn't it, to prime you for the dream logic that's going to overwhelm it later on.
Yeah, and there's lots of like mystery around everything as well, because like you said, it's also these sort of like weird dreams cut in. One of the big things is you find out early on that he killed someone, apparently, and you don't really know why or how, and he's wearing this weird prosthetic mask. You don't know anything about that. There's so many questions the film raises right from the offset in the first few sequences, and you're just constantly thinking about them throughout the film. But so when Alejandro Amenabar imagined the script, he said he was having horrible nightmares while he was ill with the flu. And I think this is just like, this makes so much sense when you watch the film, because if you've ever been ill with like the flu or something similar, you do get these horrible nightmares and sort of like you're not sure what's going on. And all of this comes through in this, because there's like a sense of dread about what's going to happen as well, because at the start everything seems a bit too good for Cesar. Like he is living his dream life, isn't he? He's got all these women, and like he's got these fancy cars, and he just doesn't have to do much for work. And then it all goes downhill, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think a lot of film directors over the years have done a good job of like bringing forth imagery from dreams and turning them into interesting things on screen. But Amenabar is capturing the feeling of a very specific feeling of being unsure if you're awake or asleep, or just the feeling of a lingering half dream when you wake up again. You know, if like when you first wake up, maybe the first hour of the day before you've like really settled into work, where you had a really vivid dream and it's mostly gone away, but your kind of perception of the world is just tinged by a weird memory that doesn't even really exist. That's what's happening a lot in Open Your Eyes. And it's interesting that you said it came out of like when he had the flu, because when you're really ill, that's when you're going to be passing out a lot, or sleeping and napping and waking up and coming and going. And yeah, like you said, a fever dream, you know, those lines are going to be really blurred. And and it's done so well in this film.
Yeah, because every time, like, I know from personal experience, every time I press snooze on my alarm, like I'll have a little dream and then I'll remember that more. But it's kind of like all of those little sequences feel a bit like that in this. But it does sort of ramp up. And like you said at the beginning, it's kind of like a kitchen sink drama as you go in. So Cesar is sort of like a womanizer. He's seeing like one woman for quite a bit at the start of the film. So her name is Nuria, and he's sort of like already a bit over her. And then suddenly he encounters Sophia, played by Penelope Cruz. And Sophia is his best friend's sort of love interest at the start. But instantly, Cesar's just like, I want a piece of that, basically.
Yeah, and Paleo, his friend, is very wary of that. And it's pretty unpleasant, isn't it? Like, they are best of friends, you know, the implied friendship goes back a long, long way. They're very, very close. But Cesar doesn't really think twice about making a move on Sophia. I think he says something like, well, you know, Paleo, he'd do the same thing. And
would he though?
I value his friendship. That's why I won't be telling him about it. Just really shitty behaviour.
And they make a thing. There's a really interesting scene at the beginning when they're having a tennis match, and Paleo's talking about how like good looking Cesar is and how he's just average looking, and no one ever looks at him like a second time when Cesar's about. And this kind of their roles completely reverse as the film goes on.
Yeah, in a very graphic and literal way. So Cesar's not really his girlfriend, his stalker really, Nuria, runs them off a road and causes a terrible accident that kills her and leaves him horribly disfigured. So that's why he's wearing the mask in the future, in the prison that he's in. It has a huge impact on his mental health. It's, you know, it's not just a disfigurement, but it's like it's a cracking of an identity that really was everything about him, the handsome playboy. He's no longer going to be like attractive to women, and yeah.
All of that was so interesting, wasn't it? Because he kind of like, he doesn't know who he is. He has no perception of himself without his looks. And you realize how fundamental they are to him. Like his entire lifestyle is based around being a playboy. He's like a handsome guy. And then suddenly all that is taken away from him. He doesn't really have a career or a job or anything like that or anything else in his life. His whole thing is he doesn't really have to want for much. He's just there enjoying life because all these things come to him when he wants them. So then suddenly after the crash, he is disfigured and he does everything he can to try and fix this, doesn't he? He goes after Sophia, doesn't he? There's like this amazing scene where he's like watching her do a mime act in the rain, and she's not looking at him for the whole time. And then they have this sort of like this confrontation almost, don't they?
Yeah, she finds it difficult to be around him in an interesting way. I don't know how superficial we're supposed to see Sophia as, right? Because it seems quite superficial, but that there's the added layer that like she finds it difficult to be around him because they only spent like one night together. They've only met once, and he's had this horrible accident, and he's become quite bitter, and he's kind of taking it out on her and Paleo, and he's also kind of like obsessed with her a little bit, and he's trying to like recapture this night that they had before the accident, and just trying to like make that all come back. And it's an awful lot of pressure to put on Sophia. So yeah, I guess she's not. It's not just like a superficial thing from her. It's like,
it's just like, how would you react to that? Like, what would you do in that position? She doesn't know, so she thought the best thing to do was like, she knows that everything that he was this handsome guy, so I'm gonna take a step back and let him sort himself out first. But all of this, like the scene as well, the scene in the rain is juxtaposed with a scene you saw like before that, where Cesar's imagining their perfect meeting, like it's sunny and they're having this really romantic moment, and certain stuff that's said in that moment, and there's lots of lines in the film which are repeated, aren't they? And you get this real sense of deja vu, which comes through in a dream. So it's really clever the way it does it, because you get repeating dialogue, but sometimes you don't realize it's repeating dialogue because it's in a different scene, and like you may have forgotten it from a previous one. But there's all these little elements which again sort of like make you question the reality of it, even though it's sort of played as from the offset, it's kind of like a straight down the line, almost thriller kind of drama film from outside looking in.
Kind of, yeah, but with all these mysterious motifs that make the nature of reality in the film kind of break apart and fall away. And meanwhile, in the background, bubbling away, in a kind of similar way to Total Recall, we've got TV adverts or TV programs discussing an interesting new technology just to make you aware, as the audience, this exists in this world. And initially, it's just the breakthrough of cryonisation. Our old friend from our time travel series, freezing bodies to wake them up again in the future. I don't think it gets like a full explanation when it's first introduced, but the premise is freezing the body at the point of death, or I don't quite know how they're going to get their hands on your body, but like as soon as they can after you die, whacking you in a freezer and then leaving you there until they find the cure, which again, another Simpsons concept, right? That happens to Mr. Burns. I think it's a Halloween episode or something, where it's like, oh, we'll wake you up as soon as we can find the cure for 27 stab wounds to the chest. Yeah. Which is what I was thinking when they were just promising to like wake anyone up in the future when, well, like, what if they died from a gunshot wound to the head? Like,
yeah, exactly.
But that's the idea. That's what they're selling. That's the new technology bubbling away in the background.
Yeah, constantly in the back, isn't it? And you see this guy advertising it in the adverts and stuff. And they make a comment about Walt Disney a few times, don't they? Because there's that rumor that Walt Disney was cryogenically frozen, which I don't think is true, but it's interesting that's thrown in.
When did he die? The problem with that is he must have died so long ago. Well, maybe
he
not.
He was cremated on 17th of December, 1966.
That's the opposite of cryonisation.
Yeah, so I don't think they're going to bring him back. So talking about, I mentioned a bit. So I mentioned already, like Cesar and Pelayo kind of go through this reversal of roles. So that's really shown in that nightclub scene, which is really off-putting to watch. Like you've got Cesar walking around. He's got this prosthetic on at the start, but then he takes it off and then just gets really drunk. And you feel really bad for him. And then sort of Pelayo's kind of like, he's making moves on Sophia, but he's also sort of like telling his friend, like, you've just got to sort of like, you've got to sort yourself out. You've got to kind of like get over this horrendous thing that's happened to you in some way. And yeah, it's weird seeing sort of like, because Pelayo was the drunk friend previously when Cesar was making the moves on Sophia. So they've completely reversed roles at this point. And then Cesar imagines all the things that could be happening between Sophia and Pelayo. And it's just a really interesting scene. How did you feel about that? And then obviously the moment where everything sort of is supposed to have changed.
Yeah, I mean, watching it through, I didn't pick up on that moment as being particularly significant. Obviously, he wakes up and it's another moment of him seeing Nuria and then Sophia, and that concept of them kind of switching roles gets heightened more and more throughout the film. It might be the first time it happens. I'm not sure. I can't remember, but I didn't really grasp onto it as like this is a significant change in tone, and the change in tone seemed to happen a bit more smoothly. Did you feel like that was a noticeable turning point in the film before you were later told that it was the turning point in the film?
Yeah. So that moment, just to clarify, is the moment where Cesar's on the floor. He's sort of passed out drunk in the street. And I really picked up on this because I stopped the film to go get a drink at this point which I'd not remembered that this was the point, but it felt like the right time to stop for a second. And then when they mentioned that was the point, I was like, this is mad, because it felt like 2 films for me, because I'd had that little intermission.
Oh, that's interesting. And it is definitely there's a climax to that scene, isn't there? It's a very intense scene, like you were saying, when he's wandering around the club. It's got that amazing shot where he gets so drunk he's just wandering around with the mask on the back of his head. So he's got these, he's literally two-faced, and you see him in silhouette in the nightclub, and he's just in a daze. It's a very good scene, but no, I didn't get this sense that it was a turning point. And we don't normally do this, but I feel like it's important for the VR nature of the conversation that basically what's happened is that's the moment where VR gets switched on for Caesar. We don't find this out until the very end of the film, but he is from that point on living in a virtual reality constructed world after his own death, years and years in the future. And they've pinpointed this moment, I don't think for any particular reason, right? They have to select a point where they can seamlessly do it. But emotionally for him, it's obviously a significant turning point in his life where he decides he needs to get his life back together, I guess. Is that the point?
At that point, he's at his lowest, isn't he? So you've seen him at his high point at the start, then he's at his lowest after that sort of nightclub scene, and Sophia's left, and then you find out what happens. So late at the very end, you find out that what happened after that is he never saw Sophia again. He did all this research into this life extension program, which is what he ends up in, and signs up for that, and takes a bunch of pills and kills himself. So none of that is sort of like clear when you're watching the film until the very end. But but when you look at this point, when he sort of wakes up and sees Sophia when he's like passed out in the street, after that you get another high point, don't you? Because he suddenly gets his face fixed. There's this new technology. He says it's very sci-fi-esque. He talks about all the wires and stuff and how miraculous it is. He's living this dream life with Sophia. They're sort of like having a really great relationship. And then it all seems a little bit too good to be true. And then it descends into the sort of the nightmare that it is for sort of like the rest of the film, and more of the weirdness comes through.
Yeah, and you've also got him talking to Antonio, his psychiatrist in the prison, later in the narrative, but at the same time in the film, and he's insisting to Antonio that the doctors didn't fix his face, and it was all bullshit. It didn't work. But then you're seeing it play out, and it's like, well, it has worked. His face is fine. He's back to normal. All this contradictory evidence and contradictory narrative lines running at the same time, building up on that confusion, and then you have things like Nuria and Sophia swapping roles and all of that, which really reminded me of Vertigo. And he does say at the very end of the film, he's standing on top of the building and he says he gets vertigo. I couldn't tell if that was supposed to be a little name drop, a little deliberate, tip of the hat kind of thing.
It feels like it, doesn't it?
Yeah, because a lot of the tone of uncertainty and dream logic and losing your sense of self felt a lot like Vertigo to me. And also the way that the character is sort of witnessing his love interest sort of slipping in and out of her own identity. That really reminded me of Vertigo. And just all the craziness of it and the sort of mistrust.
Yeah, because you never sort of like know what to believe in this. And it's kind of like, again, like Total Recall, you've got these two realities playing out throughout the film. So you've got the reality of Cesar with the psychiatrist, Antonio, which is happening throughout. And you've got this sort of reality that his face has been fixed, and sort of like what to believe. Has that happened? Or sort of like, has he just gone on some sort of like crazy psychosis? Like, what is happening there? And then obviously when he apparently kills Sophia, who looks like Nuria, that's the moment where it's sort of like the big murder happens. And you're like, what is going through this guy's head? Like, you're seeing all these weird things, and it becomes a bit... It reminded me of Jacob's Ladder quite a lot as well.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So this sort of like fever dream that really sort of kicks in with all of that, and then like not knowing who to trust and which reality is real. It does really mess with your head. But also, if you're watching this not knowing it has a virtual reality twist at the end, then you're kind of like, you're still trying to make sense of it. You're like, is someone trying to frame him? Is he going mad?
Well, I have to admit that about halfway through the film, I looked up the Wikipedia and I just did like a Control F for virtual reality because I'm the same as you. Like, I've seen Vanilla Sky before, and this is exactly the same plot as Vanilla Sky, but that left me just a bit like, I didn't really think about it much afterwards. I just got a bit worried that this wasn't a good choice for this series. Basically, I was like, what's going on? Have we picked a film that doesn't have any VR in it? So I have to admit, I quickly looked it up just to make sure that VR was on the way. So that did change my experience of it a little bit as well, because then you make assumptions about what's coming. And I deliberately didn't read the whole article. I just checked that it was going to be in there. But you're kind of making assumptions about what might be, where the pieces might be fitting and where it might come into play.
So that puts you more in the shoes of Cesar, doesn't it? Because you've got this total immersion in the film. You believe it. You take everything as read until the end, where you find out like it's all a simulation. This is your dream, and we're supposed to make it like it can be happy, but you're choosing to make it a nightmare because you're kind of struggling with the reality of it and what to believe.
Yeah, but he gets that realization earlier than you might think, and certainly earlier than I was expecting, because there's like a whole. The final act of the film plays out after that, because I think, does it go straight from the murder? He has this complete mental break where Sophia becomes Nuria and Sophia's just gone, and everyone's just telling him that Nuria is Sophia. That's always been the same woman. She looks like that. All of this, and then he ends up smothering her and killing her when he finally goes back to her. Does it go straight from that to jumping into the future timeline, the present day, him in prison for that crime?
Yeah, pretty much, because obviously they've sort of teased it throughout, and then it's kind of like, so then it seems more like he's just been recalling all of these things he's been through.
But that's when we get into so we jump into that timeline, but that's when we get into the VR stuff, because he figures it out pretty quickly. He sees it on the TV again. We've seen it 2 or 3 times, and then we've got a whole act where he's now aware of the VR, not 100% certain, but aware of the concept, and then pretty obsessed with the idea and convinced of it.
Because he's put under hypnosis by Antonio, isn't he? And then he sort of like has that recollection of being in the office, and it looks different to everything else you've seen in the film. It's like all kind of like sketchy effect or something like that on it. And he's signing some sort of document, and then you're kind of not sure where this fits in, but you instantly know it's different to the rest of the things he's been thinking about. So I found that sort of like another sort of like interesting element that they added in. And also like after that, he starts saying how Antonio looked like his dad a bit. So again, you're getting more of this dream logic sort of creeping in, because this figure looks like his dad. So he's sort of like, he's shaping his reality.
Yeah, that's just dropped in quite casually, isn't it? And it fits into the picture, like everything in the film, really. It fits into the picture at the very end when everything's been unraveled a bit more. The fact that he looks similar to his dad is just a coincidence, and works for the relationship that they're building up between psychiatrist and patient, and sort of complicates that for them, which works perfectly well even when you know the ending, but it works on its own merit without any other kind of explanation needed. But one character we haven't talked about yet is the Frenchman, Duvernois, who is the person that he's signing that contract to and signing his life away to, because we have another scene that really reminded me of Total Recall, because he visits him in the bar, doesn't he, when he's not at his lowest ebb, but his second lowest ebb, and when he's really like doubting his own reality, he gets a visit. And it's very similar to the scene in Total Recall, isn't it?
Yeah, I was thinking that as well, because like I watched these films pretty much back to back again, and it just felt like the same, didn't it? Because he's explaining the technology, he's explaining what he's been through and what he's experiencing. But Caesar has a different reaction to it. He sort of like, he believes it more, doesn't he? He sort of like accepts that more as an option because he's going through some crazy stuff.
Well, he sort of does. Again, he's coming in and he's puncturing reality with this reality-shattering news that we see in these VR films, and he even like shows Caesar that he's got these like godlike powers because he just says, "I just want everyone to be quiet," and then literally everyone is silent. But he runs away from it, doesn't he? He doesn't accept it just at face value and goes, "Okay, it's all a dream." But that's kind of the seed that's going to allow him to. Well, I guess the seed is that he's been watching it on TV the whole time, but this is someone coming and telling him, and he's primed to accept that because he's in the middle of a complete mental break. But he's ready to accept that kind of an idea, and it's going to grow and grow in his mind, and allows him to kind of crack it all open at the end of the film.
Yeah, right up to the point where he visits the company's building and like manages to storm in and get to the top, and then all of that crazy stuff happens. But then he sort of like, once he has that realization, he gains control of his reality again, doesn't he? Like in The Matrix, like when Neo realizes he actually is the one, he sort of gains power. So Caesar suddenly gains control of this, and there's the scene where they're outside the building, him and Antonio, and there's people firing at them. You think it's all going to end badly, but then Caesar kind of goes, "Actually, no, this is not really happening. Nothing bad's really happening. It's just all in my head."
Yeah, kind of. It's really horrible, though, because he's reached that conclusion and it's very believable. It's a completely understandable revelation to watch on screen because things have been getting more and more ridiculous. We've seen all the fever dream logic, and then we've moved on to a scene where he's allowed out of jail to go and investigate his own crime. So it actually makes a lot of sense that like none of this is real.
When you put it like that as well, he's let out of jail to go and investigate his own crime. It's mad.
Yeah. It's similar to Total Recall again in the way that things ramp up and the unreality of it all ramps up and becomes even greater as it goes along. So that allows you to accept this concept of virtual reality. But then when he does go outside and he's just given up on reality as being real, he shoots a security guard. And again, like we were talking about the Verhoeven violence, this isn't a Verhoeven movie, but it's an incredibly violent moment. There is a huge burst of blood coming out of the guy's chest. And then Caesar shoots him like 3 more times point blank range. I found that really shocking because it was just a horrible thing to do. I mean, we know where he's at mentally, but I just wasn't expecting that level of violence. I guess I was expecting something to happen off screen or, for the person to disappear or something like that. I just wasn't expecting very realistic bloody violence at that moment.
Yeah. And then it kind of like, it does shock you when they all disappear. Like straight after that. And you're right. When I was watching it, that did really have a big impact because it's so shocking. And it's sort of like, if he is just like a mad person, as you would kind of assume, then he's just done this horrendous thing and just in broad daylight. So like, what can happen after that?
Yes, well, exactly. And you have to then, you're praying that it is all virtual reality then, because he's just done something so horrible that if he's wrong in his assumption, there's no coming back from that. I mean, he also smothered his girlfriend, which is pretty awful. But he's become like he's sort of turning into like a spree shooter at this point. He's completely unhinged. So it's a big relief when we get the reassurance. Of course, it all might just be in his head. That's not out of the question for this film. I don't love that explanation for films, but this film certainly works on that level where there's a mistrust of reality, and it could all just be part of his psychosis that he's suffering with.
Yeah, but I think with this one, it's not as... There's too many loose ends, I think, and too much stuff going on that kind of like it leans more to the sci-fi explanation for things.
Yeah, no, I do agree. Everyone disappears, and then a man comes in and explains that it's a simulation. So
But then, yeah, it's the unreliable narrator, isn't it? You don't know what to believe with this film, and it's sort of like it all comes to a head when he's on top of the building, and he's suddenly sort of like faced with the idea, like, what do I do now? Do I rewrite the reality I'm in and live this happy dream, or do I end this and see what's out there? So this whole sort of like VR as a post-death life extension, and sort of like VR as an afterlife, and then the option to be almost like reincarnated is kind of like in there. There's quite heavy sort of themes.
Yeah, that VR as taking the role of the afterlife is a really interesting concept. It's kind of like it's the brain in a vat idea, which we haven't really seen in any of the films so far in the series. This idea that the VR becomes your entire existence and your real life body is reduced to nothing. Now, he's got this possibility of waking up and coming back to life, but it's not really guaranteed. And we do actually know that he's died. He's no longer alive. So the virtual world becomes the only existence he's capable of living. So it's much more than a dream. It's more powerful than a dream, because until he is offered that option, there was no intention to wake him up. It was going to be his existence forever, I think, presumably just forever, right? I think, because that's what he signed up for, isn't it?
Yeah, this sort of like perfect life.
Yeah. What do they call it? Perception, something or other. Artificial perception. Again, it's similar to Total Recall. It's an upsell, isn't it? The primary offer of life extension is freeze you and wake you up. But if you don't want to be woken up because you're going to wake up in the future and you know everyone you know is dead, we can offer you this package, which is artificial perception. You just live whatever life you want, and we'll just leave you in the tank forever.
Yeah, this whole sort of simulated reality. And it's like, it's funny how much sort of like life after death and all that kind of like those experiences are coming into the VR series so far. Like we saw in Brainstorm, we sort of like experienced what it was like to die. And that was sort of like the main premise at the end of that film. And yeah, there's something about sort of like you're creating your reality, and then that can extend your life in some way. And it's that how you perceive everything. It's like, it's so ingrained into these kind of films and these concepts that it's just like, it seems like it's going to be something which will come up again and again and again.
Yeah, I think that there's two things at play there, isn't there? There's dream worlds and touching on the afterlife as well. And I wasn't really expecting the afterlife stuff to come into it as much as it already has when we started this series. But I guess, you know, if you think about like VR is all about creating a different reality, another plane of existence. And you think about what cultural perceptions of another plane of existence would have been before the concept of artificial reality came in. You've got dream worlds. People were dreaming, you know, since caveman times. And you've got concepts of the afterlife, and that's huge and built up in all sorts of different directions as society evolved. But that's another plane of existence that you're going to be, in some cultures, that you're going to be transported to after your death. So it kind of makes sense that virtual reality films would touch on those two things. But it's actually quite interesting that Open Your Eyes does both, basically. It's looking at dream worlds in VR and also like a dream that you can live in after death.
So it's really interesting because both of these films, they do work into this theme of escaping your identity and then trying to figure out who you are if your entire sort of like reality has changed, and trying to make sense of all of that in this weird sort of like dreamscape. And I think that leads us nicely into sort of like the juxtaposition of that, which is real world dangers. So sort of like taking away some of the dream logic and looking at what happens when you've got virtually created people coming into the real world. So what are we looking at to explore that theme next week, Matt?
We've got a couple of films that I've never seen before, so I'm looking forward to checking these out.
I hope they're good then.
We got Virtuosity from 1995, a VR serial killer escapes into the real world, and Simone from 2002, which is all about a VR actress who comes to life, or they have to pretend she comes to life.
Starring Al Pacino as well.
Oh,
there we go. So yeah, that will be next week's episode. So keep a lookout on your podcast feeds for that. In the meantime, if you want to find us, we are all over social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and that's about it. We've got a website. You can find us, look at Through Sci-Fi or Through Sci-Fi Pod or journeythroughsci-fi.com. Come and find us, come and have a chat. We'd love to hear from you.
If you want to support the show, you can find us on patreon.com/journeythroughsci-fi for exclusive bonus content. So come and check us out there if you can afford it and if you would like to. And if you can't afford it, hey, leave us a review. That would be really helpful. Let us know what your favourite Arnie face is that he makes in Total Recall and leave that in a review and we'll check that out. You can also email us, journeythroughsci-fi@gmail.com.
Yes, send us your best Arnie images and GIFs of his face. We'd love to see them. We always love seeing more Arnie.
That's all for this time. Join us next time.